People who live in Boston's Beacon Hill don't actually live. They perform. They perform wealth. They perform lineage. And they certainly perform grief. I know this because for 8 years, I tried desperately to learn the script. And now, as a widow, I find myself performing the most demanding role of all, the grieving wife who inherited everything. My name is Seraphina Wells. Sarah, to the very few people I allow close, and the house I live in, this magnificent, imposing structure of red brick and white trim is more a mausoleum than a home. It belongs to the Wells family, a name that means money and old power in this city. It's the kind of power that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Alistair was a Wells, my husband, my childhood sweetheart. If you can believe such a cliche existed for two people who ended up living in a gilded cage. He was the CEO of Wells & Associates, a firm that didn't just invest money. It moved money, the kind of money that buys silence and influences legislation. He died 2 years ago. Drowned, they said. A tragic accident during a sudden squall off the coast of Maine, where the family keeps their summer compound. He was alone on his favorite sailboat, the Aegis. The Coast Guard found the wreckage, but they found Alistair 2 days later. The police report was brief and final. Misadventure. Alcohol was a factor. A sudden wave. A lost footing. Case closed. But for me, the case was never closed. Alistair was many things. Ambitious, sometimes distant, and obsessed with the Wells legacy. But he was not careless, and he was certainly not a drunk. He drank, yes, like every other Boston elite, but he was always meticulous, always in control. The idea that he simply slipped and drowned because of a little too much Pinot felt like a lie stitched onto a silk lining. For 2 years, I've been living in this beautiful house, haunted by that lie. The Wells family, Alistair's brother, Julian, who swiftly took over the firm, his cold, imperious mother, Vivian. They wanted me quiet, grateful for the inheritance, and gone. But I stayed. I stayed because leaving meant accepting their story. And I couldn't. My career is the only thing that's kept me tethered to sanity. I'm a private art restorer. I deal with delicate works, centuries old, pieces that hold secrets in their layers of varnish and crackle. My job is to see what's hidden, to meticulously peel back the damage and reveal the truth beneath. It's a painstaking process, requiring a kind of obsessive focus, a focus I realized I should have applied to my husband's life. The piece that finally broke the silence was a painting that had belonged to Alistair's grandfather. It was a rather dreary dark portrait of a clipper ship, something called the Watchman. It had hung in Alistair's private study, a room I'd barely entered since the funeral. Julian, his brother, had casually suggested I sell it. It's ugly, Sarah. Just get rid of the dreary old thing. You could use the space. Julian's tone was always dismissive, making me feel like an annoying pest he had to tolerate for the sake of appearances. But Alistair had loved that painting. He used to stare at it, sometimes for 20 minutes straight, without saying a word. So, instead of selling it, I decided to restore it. It was in bad shape, the canvas brittle, the frame chipping. I had it brought to my studio, a bright modern room I'd built into the carriage house behind the main residence. The contrast between my vibrant chemical-scented studio and the dusty gloom of the main house always felt like a metaphor for my marriage. I started with the frame. It was a heavy, ornate piece, probably original to the 1890s. As I was gently prying off a loose piece of decorative plaster from the back corner, my chisel slipped. Instead of plaster, I hit wood. Hollow wood. My heart gave a sudden, hard jerk, like a boat catching a submerged log. I worked carefully, peeling back the velvet backing until I revealed a tiny, almost imperceptible seam, where the wood had been expertly hollowed out and then sealed shut. Someone had hidden something inside. My hands were shaking as I used a palette knife to gingerly pry open the hidden compartment. It was small, no bigger than a matchbox. Inside, tucked and folded, was a piece of aged, brittle photographic paper. It wasn't a photograph of a person or a place. It was a close-up shot, slightly out of focus, of a small carved wooden bird. It looked like a child's toy, perhaps a relic from an antique shop. The bird itself wasn't the striking part. What made my breath catch in my throat were the things scrawled onto the margins of the photo in Alistair's precise, angular handwriting, a series of numbers, 1017, 34, 02, a date, 09/15, and 3 distinct, sharp symbols. A small crude anchor, a pair of scales, and a broken circle. I stared at the paper until the numbers blurred. This was it. This was the cold, hard proof that Alistair had been keeping secrets. People don't hide children's toys and cryptic codes inside expensive 19th century frames unless they're running scared. My mind immediately spun back to the weeks leading up to his death. He had been nervous, agitated. He stopped sleeping through the night. I remember asking him about the strange tension in his shoulders one evening as we were getting ready for a stiff dinner party at the yacht club. "Alistair, what is it?" "The firm?" I had asked, tying the silk bow of his tuxedo. He had laughed, a short, brittle sound. "The firm is always the firm, Sarah. It's just, a few things are getting messy. High stakes, that's all." Then he had kissed me, a quick peck on the forehead, and said, "Don't worry your pretty head about it. That's my job." That patronizing dismissal used to infuriate me. Now, the memory felt like a warning sign I had stupidly ignored. I hadn't worried my pretty head, and now he was gone. I immediately knew I couldn't show this to anyone. Not the police, who had closed their books, and certainly not Julian or Vivienne. They would look at the photo and call it the rambling of a stressed executive, another sign that Alistair had been unwell, and that I too was becoming hysterical. I went straight to his study. It was a room frozen in time, the faint scent of his pipe tobacco still lingering, his heavy leather chair pushed back from the imposing mahogany desk. I sat down and opened his old laptop, the one Julian hadn't bothered to take, assuming it was just full of golf scores and stock market data. It was password protected, of course. I tried the usual. His birthday, my birthday, our anniversary, nothing. I leaned back, closing my eyes, trying to hear his voice, trying to think like the man who was both my husband and a ruthless corporate player. Then I remembered the painting, the Watchman. He had always called it his silent sentinel. I typed in the name of the ship, the Watchman, Toyazvamin, access granted. The flood of relief was so intense, it made my head swim. Alistair, the meticulous architect, had left me a key. The laptop was full of spreadsheets, as expected, but deep within a folder labeled Tax Returns 2023, I found a hidden file named simply Aegis, the name of his ill-fated sailboat. I opened it. It wasn't a financial document. It was a short, sharp message, written a few days before he left for the main compound. "Sarah, if you are reading this, I failed. I thought I could fix it, but the hole is too deep. The rot is too extensive. The firm is not what it seems. It's a colossal, ugly thing, and I am trapped by it. I am trying to build a case. Look to the frame. The numbers are the key. For God's sake, trust no one, especially the family." The shock was paralyzing. A colossal, ugly thing. A trap. And the explicit warning, trust no one, especially the family. The police had called it a tragic accident. Alistair had called it failure. I was starting to call it murder. My fear quickly morphed into a cold, focused anger. My initial suspicion had been emotional. Now it was fact. He hadn't slipped. He had been taken out because he knew too much, and was trying to build a case against his own family's operation. The Wells and Associates firm wasn't just a financial scandal. It was something criminal, something lethal. I looked down at the photo of the carved wooden bird. The numbers, 1017 34.02. The date, 09/15. The symbols, anchor, scales, broken circle. The numbers must be coordinates, or perhaps bank accounts. The date, a deadline or a rendezvous. But the symbols, they felt personal, almost medieval. I was a restorer, a person who understood symbols. But these were alien. I realized I was in deep, alone, and completely surrounded by the people who had potentially killed my husband and were now sharing my lunch table at Sunday brunch. Julian, his brother, the current CEO, who always wore those expensive tailored suits and whose smile never quite reached his eyes. Vivienne, the matriarch, whose disapproval was sharp enough to cut glass. I was living in the nest of vipers, and my quest for the truth had just begun. I took a deep breath, closed the laptop, and gently put the coded photograph back into the frame of the Watchman. The performance was back on, and this time, the stakes were my life. The scariest part about finding a massive, lethal secret is that you still have to go grocery shopping. You still have to answer emails, talk to your gardener, and worst of all, attend the dreaded family functions. My life had exploded into a conspiracy theory, yet I had to maintain the illusion of a quiet, wealthy widow who spent her days polishing oil paintings. Alistair's final warning, trust no one, especially the family, was a mantra spinning constantly in my head. Every time the heavy mahogany front door opened, I expected to see a killer, but it was always Julian, impeccably dressed, or Vivienne, impeccably cold. Julian, Alistair's younger brother and the new CEO, was my most immediate threat. He had moved into the guest wing. Just to ensure you're looked after, Sarah, he'd insisted. His voice smooth as silk and just as slippery. His presence in the house was a constant surveillance. He was too solicitous, too interested in my plans, and too quick to offer advice on selling off Alistair's old junk. That desk in Alistair's study, he said one morning over coffee, his eyes tracking my reaction. It's enormous, taking up far too much space. I could arrange to have it sent to storage. It must be painful for you to look at. My heart hammered. He was talking about the desk that held the hidden laptop. It's fine, Julian, I said, forcing a casual sip of my Earl Grey. I find his study quite comforting, actually. I might even use it as a secondary studio. All that mahogany is a wonderful backdrop for my work. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Very well, dear. Just trying to help you move forward. We all grieve differently. I knew what he was really saying. You should be packing up your past and exiting the stage. I spent every free moment obsessed with the cipher. I had the photo of the wooden bird and the coded numbers, tucked into a false bottom I had created in my toolbox. My studio, my fortress, became my command center. The code was the key, 1017 34.02. I immediately thought of GPS coordinates. I typed the numbers into a mapping program, assuming they were latitude and longitude. The pin dropped into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, nowhere near Maine or Boston. Alistair wasn't being poetic. He was being precise. Next, I considered bank account numbers, but the Wells firm was meticulous. Their internal numbering system was far more complex. The date, 09/15, was equally frustrating. It wasn't my birthday, our anniversary, or his death date. It felt like a date in the future, or perhaps a reference to something historical. I realized I was approaching it as a restorer, logically, sequentially. But Alistair was a strategist, a man who saw layers in everything. The message was meant to be subtle, hiding in plain sight. I started reviewing Alistair's life, looking for anomalies. He was heavily invested in maritime charity, particularly one that focused on cleaning up historical shipwrecks. I spent an entire day in the Boston Public Library, poring over old maritime ledgers. Then, I had a flash of inspiration. I remembered Alistair mentioning once that his grandfather, the original owner of the Watchman painting, used to assign a specific inventory number to every piece of art the family acquired. I rushed back to the manor and spent hours in the dusty basement archives. It was a suffocating space, filled with centuries of Wells family papers and pretentious taxidermy. Finally, I found it, an old inventory ledger, bound in brittle leather. I flipped through the pages until I found the section on nautical art, The Watchman. Oil on canvas. C. 1890. Inventory no. 1017. A thrill shot through me. The first 4 digits of the code, 1017, the inventory number of the very painting that hid the message. He was anchoring the code to an object in the house. Now, the remaining numbers, 3402. This had to be a reference within the house itself. I looked at the ledger again. Many of the larger pieces of furniture were also numbered. I searched for inventory entry 34. It was a small, unassuming writing bureau in the library. And entry 02, it was a safe deposit box key kept within the bureau. He hadn't left me a single coordinate. He had left me a scavenger hunt. I waited until late that night. Julian was out at a black tie gala. Vivian was back in her compound. The house was finally quiet. The kind of absolute silence that screams danger. I crept down to the library. The massive room was lined with books that smelled of leather and dust. I found the writing bureau, solid oak, carved with gargoyles. I opened the top drawer, the hinges creaking loudly in the oppressive quiet. Inside, beneath a stack of old utility bills, I found a small silver key, stamped with the number 02, success. But as I reached for the key, a chilling detail hit me. The writing bureau was usually locked. I knew this because I had tried to open it a month ago, and it had been firmly shut. Tonight, the key was simply sitting there. The bureau was unlocked. Someone else had been here. My blood ran cold. I immediately put the key back exactly where I found it and closed the drawer. I retreated to the shadows behind a towering bookcase, holding my breath. I listened hard, every nerve ending screaming. The house was dead quiet. Had Julian or Vivian unlocked it? Or had they seen me looking at the painting and moved the key to tempt me, to see how I would react? Were they watching? Paranoia, that quiet poison, began to seep into my thinking. I imagined the house was wired, that every portrait's eyes held a tiny camera lens. I had to find out if I was being watched. The next day, I started my own subtle surveillance. I went to a high-end camera shop and bought a tiny, ridiculously expensive piece of equipment, a thermal imaging sensor disguised as a fancy smoke detector. I told the shop assistant it was for a sensitive restoration project. I installed it in the main hallway, just outside the study, a perfect vantage point to monitor who came and went. It was overkill, absurd, but it made me feel like I was fighting back. A few days later, the thermal sensor lit up, showing an unexpected spike in activity around the writing bureau in the middle of the night. It wasn't Julian. He was clearly visible, a glowing orange figure walking to the kitchen for a midnight snack. This was a smaller, faster heat signature, someone who shouldn't have been in the library at 3 a.m. And then there were the symbols. Anchor, scales, broken circle. I knew the scales symbolized justice or law. The anchor, stability, or perhaps maritime matters. The broken circle felt like a rupture, a failed cycle. It was too vague. I thought about Alistair's life outside the firm. He had a tight-knit circle of 3 close friends from Yale, all part of the high society Boston club circuit. There was George, a retired Navy captain, now running a shipping logistics company, Anchor. Helena, a powerful corporate lawyer. known for her ruthless pursuit of justice, Scales, and Marcus, a venture capitalist who had recently gone through a devastating, high-profile divorce. Broken circle. Alistair hadn't left me a code. He had left me a list of suspects, or maybe allies. I decided to start with Helena. If Alistair was building a case against the firm, he would need the best lawyer he knew. I called her, suggesting we meet for a discreet lunch. I'm restoring an old family portrait, I lied smoothly. I just wanted to consult you on the legalities of inheriting art in Massachusetts. Alistair always trusted your opinion, she agreed, meeting me at a secluded, pretentious oyster bar overlooking the harbor, a very Boston location. Helena was sharp, elegant, and possessed eyes that seemed to analyze your weaknesses instantly. We exchanged polite condolences and small talk about the firm's transition. Then I brought up the nautical symbols. Alistair was obsessed with naval history lately. I ventured casually. He was talking about this old tradition where sailors use these 3 specific symbols, the anchor, the scales, and the broken circle, to denote certain loyalties. Have you ever heard of that? Helena's mask slipped, just for a millisecond. Her perfectly poised hand paused over her chilled wine glass. Her eyes narrowed. No, Sarah, she said slowly, her voice low. That sounds like something Alistair would make up after too many whiskeys. You know how theatrical he could be. She changed the subject immediately, asking me about the market value of the Wells estate. Her denial was too swift, too practiced. She knew the symbols. I left the lunch feeling both energized and terrified. Helena was either a key ally Alistair had prepared or a crucial suspect in his betrayal. If she was helping him build a case, she would need to deny knowledge to protect herself. If she was involved in his death, she would certainly deny it. That night, back in the gilded cage, I couldn't sleep. The thermal sensor showed Julian was in his room. The house was quiet. I crept back down to the library. I decided to trust Alistair's instincts over my fear. I took the key stamped ZO2. My surveillance confirmed an intrusion. But I needed the information behind the key more than I needed safety. The key had led me to a high-security vault downtown. The next morning, wearing a discreet disguise and using a name I hadn't used since college, I presented the key to the vault manager. I was crossing the line now, moving from grieving widow to active participant in a corporate conspiracy. But Alistair had told me what to do. I had to listen. The high-security vault felt like a cathedral, dedicated to secrecy. Cold marble floors, hushed tones, and the heavy scent of old money being locked away from the world. Walking into that building felt less like running an errand, and more like entering an operating theater. Sterile, focused, and utterly terrifying. I presented Key 2 to the clerk. Along with the required identification, I had chosen the name S. Atherton, my mother's maiden name, and used an old, rarely seen photo ID. I wasn't just being cautious. I was trying to leave Sarah Wells and her recognizable profile outside the perimeter. The vault manager led me down a narrow corridor, lined with massive reinforced steel doors. My hands were clammy, a ridiculous physical reaction to a non-physical threat. This is just paper, Sarah, I told myself. It's just paper. But the warning Alistair had left, the rot is too extensive, told me that paper could be lethal. He unlocked the box, pulled out the thin metal container, and handed it to me. You have 30 minutes in the private viewing room, Ms. Atherton. The viewing room was tiny, soundproofed, and had only a desk and a single chair. I locked the door behind me and put the box on the desk. It was so light I almost laughed. After all the intrigue, all the paranoia, all the risk, the truth was held in a featherlight aluminum box. I opened it. There were 2 things inside. The first was a micro SD card, the kind used in high-end surveillance equipment. It was a digital ghost, capable of holding thousands of documents. The second was a small, tightly folded piece of personalized stationery. Alistair's letterhead. I opened it, recognizing his handwriting immediately. It wasn't a warning. It was a confession and a final will. Sarah, if you've gotten this far, you are either the smartest woman I know or the most reckless. Assume the worst. The contents of the card are everything. The ledger, the shell corporations, the bribes, the falsified records. It proves that Wells and Associates has been operating a massive decades-long scheme involving the illegal disposal of chemical waste disguised as deep water investment. The profits are staggering, the environmental impact is horrific, and the complicity reaches the highest level of the family. I tried to stop it internally. They found out. They are ruthless. The symbols, Anchor, George, the shipping logistics, Scales, Helena, the legal counsel, and Broken Circle, Marcus, the venture capital, are not suspects. They were the key operators I needed to bring down the whole structure. But I realized, too late, that 2 of the 3 had turned against me. They are no longer the loyalists I thought they were. The date -15 was the deadline I gave them to confess before I went public. I never made it to that deadline. Destroy the card or deliver it to the FBI. It is a one-way ticket to justice, or to your own grave. I leave that terrible choice to you. I love you, and I am so sorry I put my ambition ahead of our safety. I felt sick. It wasn't just a financial scandal. It was a devastating environmental crime spanning generations. Wells and Associates, the bastion of Boston's elite, was built on poison. And Alistair had been trying to confess, trying to clean up his own family's toxic legacy. But the real shock was the betrayal. 2 of the 3 were no longer loyalists. Which 2? The shipping captain, the lawyer, or the divorcee? Alistair's final trust had been shattered by his closest friends. This was the true tragedy, the ultimate betrayal. The gilded cage wasn't built by strangers. It was built by family and close friends. I carefully tucked the micro SD card into the lining of my leather wallet. The choice was terrifyingly clear. Expose the firm and face the full, ruthless power of the Wells machine, or bury the card and live out my days in wealthy, guilty silence. I walked out of the vault building, feeling like I was carrying an invisible bomb. Every passing car, every person who looked at me, felt like a threat. When I got back to the house, the atmosphere had shifted. The cold, quiet surveillance was gone, replaced by overt, heavy tension. Julian was waiting for me in the foyer. He was pacing, something he never did. His calm facade was cracked, revealing a frantic, dangerous energy underneath. "Where have you been, Sarah?" he demanded, his voice too loud for the elegant space. "Out," I said, my voice deliberately flat. A friend needed some advice on antique furniture restoration. He didn't buy it. His eyes darted to my hands, then to my handbag. "Your friend couldn't wait. You missed lunch with Vivienne." She was rather upset. "I'll apologize to Vivienne," I said, starting toward the staircase, aiming for the safety of my studio. He moved quickly, blocking my path. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about the inheritance. I've been doing some auditing. There are some financial anomalies in Alistair's private accounts. Large withdrawals just before his death. He was fishing. He was looking for the money Alistair might have used to set up the case or the vault. Alistair managed his own money, Julian," I said, trying to push past him. "I wouldn't know." His face hardened. "Don't play coy with me. I know you've been searching through his papers. I know you found something." My heart pounded. A frantic drumbeat against my ribs. "I found nothing but old tax returns, Julian. You're jumpy. Is everything all right with Wells and Associates?" He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong and instantly painful. Alistair was unraveling, Sarah. He was going to damage everything we built. He was mentally unstable. I need to protect the firm, and I need to protect you from his delusions. Unstable, I hissed, pulling away. Or did he just grow a conscience about poisoning the ocean? The color drained from his face. His eyes, usually guarded and calculating, flared with genuine panic. You found the ledger, he breathed, the realization hitting him with lethal clarity. You know, in that moment, standing under the massive, glittering chandelier of the Wells Manor, all the pretense dissolved. The gilded cage had shattered. Julian wasn't just my husband's brother. He was an accomplice, an enemy, and now a man who knew I held the key to his ruin. I ran. I sprinted up the marble staircase, Julian's furious, panicked shout echoing behind me. Sarah! Don't you dare! You have no idea what you're dealing with. I slammed the studio door shut, locked it, and shoved a heavy, antique chest against the handle. I was trapped, but I was also ready. I immediately went to Alistair's laptop and opened the thermal monitor app. I looked at the recent activity. There were multiple nighttime visits to the library by the small, fast heat signature, the same one that had checked the unlocked bureau. And then I saw the recent, chilling data. Every time Julian left the house in the last week, the smaller signature appeared almost immediately after. Julian wasn't the small heat signature. He was the large, obvious target, but the smaller one was his agent, his hired help, the person he had sent to check the bureau, and perhaps the person who had removed the original key after placing the new one, the one that led me to the vault. He had unlocked the drawer, waited for me to take the bait, and then put the new key there, confident I would follow the trail he had set for me. Why? I went back to Alistair's note. Destroy the card or deliver it to the FBI. It is a one-way ticket to justice, or to your own grave. Julian hadn't wanted me to find the card to destroy it. He had wanted me to find the card, so he knew I had it. Now that I knew the truth, I was a liability, and he was cornered. Suddenly, a loud, insistent pounding started on the studio door. Not Julian's voice, but a sharp, authoritative female voice. Sarah, open this door immediately. It's Vivian. We need to talk about Julian. He's become hysterical. Vivian, the matriarch. I stared at the door. Her tone was measured, calm, and exactly what she would use if she were trying to lure a hysterical family member out of a room. I looked at the thermal sensor. Julian was downstairs, a bright orange blob near the kitchen, but there was another smaller, cooler heat signature lurking near the rear exit of the main house. The smaller signature, the mystery intruder, was waiting for me to engage with Vivian. Vivian wasn't trying to save me. She was participating. She and Julian were working together. Alistair's warning was literal. Trust no one, especially the family. I realized the ultimate tragic truth. The moment I inherited the Wells fortune, I inherited the Wells targets. My husband had been killed, not by a random storm, but by a family determined to protect its dark secrets. And they had been waiting patiently for 2 years for me to make my move. I gripped the micro SD card inside my wallet. I was trapped, but I held the key to their destruction. The question was, could I survive long enough to use it? The pounding on the studio door wasn't desperate anymore. It was controlled, calculated. Someone was testing the lock, testing my nerve. Sarah, you are being ridiculous. Open this door immediately. We are your family. That was Vivian's voice, cool and precise, cutting through the thick silence. A matron managing a minor household inconvenience. Not a suspect cornered by a conspiracy. She knew what she was doing. She knew what I had. I pressed my back against the heavy chest I'd shoved against the door. Family. Alistair's warning was screaming in my ears. Trust no one, especially the family. Vivian wasn't trying to talk sense into me. She was trying to lure me into the cage. There was no time for hesitation. My exit was the window, and my lifelines were my restorer's tools. I grabbed the coil of carbon fiber filament, stronger than rope, almost invisible, and tied one end to a heavy bronze sculpture from my desk. The kind of deliberate, measured work I used to do on a 300-year-old canvas, now applied to my own survival. I pushed the window open, just enough to let the cold Boston air hit my face. It was sharp, a necessary shock of reality. I could still hear Vivienne, her voice rising slightly with genuine irritation now. "You have exactly 1 minute, Sarah. We will not be blackmailed by a hysterical girl." "Hysterical?" I mumbled, checking the knot on the filament. "No, hysteria is a luxury I can't afford." I dropped the bronze sculpture out the window. It hit the cobblestone alleyway below with a quiet, solid thud, and the filament snaked down the wall. I secured the other end around the massive iron water pipe that ran down the exterior wall of the carriage house. Meticulous, secure, a perfect restoration. My hands were shaking, but my mind was laser-focused. I was halfway out the window when I heard the unmistakable click of the carriage house's ground floor door being opened. The agent was inside. I didn't hesitate. I threw my leg over the sill, my palms gripping the filament tight. The rough fiber burned immediately against my skin, but I ignored the pain. The cobblestones rushed up to meet me. I landed hard, twisting my ankle, a sharp, searing pain, but I was out. I was free. I stumbled out of the alleyway and into the noisy, anonymous street. I pulled my coat tight. The micro SD card, Alistair's final truth, was safe in my wallet. I needed to find the third symbol, the last piece of the puzzle. Marcus, the broken circle, the desperate venture capitalist, the divorcee. He was the only potential loyalist left, or the last betrayer to be unmasked. I took the subway, losing myself instantly in the rush hour crush. The irony didn't escape me, using the city's underbelly to escape its highest social stratum. I found Marcus at a pretentious oyster bar overlooking the harbour, the same place I had met Helena, the woman who had already sold her soul for legal immunity. Marcus sat alone, looking utterly defeated, even in his perfectly tailored suit. I slid into the seat across from him. "Marcus, we need to talk about the Aegis," I said, my voice low and urgent. He didn't jump. He just slowly lifted his head, his eyes empty. "Sarah, I figured Julian would send someone eventually, but I didn't expect it to be the widow." "Julian sent his agent," I corrected, watching him carefully. "I escaped. I'm here because of Alistair. I have the ledger. I know about the chemical waste and the fraud. I know you, Helena, and George were the three he trusted." His composure cracked. His face crumpled into a genuine, agonizing expression of regret. He finally started talking, the words a low, painful rasp. "We were supposed to, Sarah. We really were. Alistair was the architect. I was the financial link, the broken circle, because my divorce had ruined me financially, and I was desperate to prove myself. Helena was the scales, the legal muscle. George was the anchor, the logistical expert who knew how the ships moved the waste. My chest felt tight. My own theory had been right. It was a triangle of friendship meant to be a tripod of justice. Which two turned Marcus? Who betrayed him? I asked, needing the final, cruel detail. He drained his glass of scotch, a heavy, audible swallow. To Helena and George, Julian got to them. He offered them a clean slate and a piece of the profits, millions, and guaranteed legal immunity from the firm's lawyers. They saw the exit and took it. Helena convinced them that Alistair was becoming unstable. A convenient, familiar lie. The truth was worse than I could have imagined. The murder wasn't just corporate. It was the brutal execution of trust. The family hadn't acted alone. They had leveraged the greed and fear of Alistair's best friends. "And you?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why didn't you go to Julian?" "Because I'm already ruined," he said. meeting my gaze, his eyes pooling with tears. What's money when you lose your dignity? I was the only true loyalist left. Alistair called me the morning he died. He was desperate. He told me he was going to destroy the evidence and then turn himself in to protect me, Helena, and George, hoping we would expose the rest. He didn't know they had already betrayed him. I told him to go to the police, but he hung up. Alistair hadn't been building a case. He had been attempting self-sacrifice. He destroyed the Aegis to ensure the original physical ledger wouldn't be found, and he put the digital card in the vault as a final desperate failsafe. And the cause of death? Marcus confirmed it with a shudder. George. He diverted Alistair's life raft and ensured no one found him until it was too late. He was on a nearby tugboat watching. The anchor, the symbol of stability, had sunk him. I had my confirmation. Julian, Vivienne, Helena, and George. A complete, devastating family unit, built on betrayal and murder. I stood up, pushing the chair back slowly. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "You gave Alistair back his truth." I left the restaurant and walked straight to a discreet federal building downtown. I went into the lobby and asked for the Organized Crime Division. I did not introduce myself as Sarah Wells. I identified myself as S. Atherton, Alistair's long-lost cousin, and a former Wells & Associates auditor. I sat in a cold, stark room for 6 hours, narrating 2 years of paranoia and placing the micro SD card on the table. The agents, initially skeptical, grew visibly alarmed as they read Alistair's note and viewed the contents of the digital ledger. The Wells name was massive, but the scope of the environmental crime was too vast to be ignored. The aftermath was a brutal, glorious storm. Wells & Associates was frozen. Julian, Vivienne, Helena, and George were all arrested within 48 hours. The news coverage was a firestorm, the scandal of the century in Boston, destroying decades of calculated reputation. I received a new identity through the Federal Witness Protection Program. I couldn't keep the name Sarah Wells. The danger was too real, the legacy too toxic. The binding element of this story is not revenge, but emancipation. I did not take the money. I used the inheritance to fund a massive environmental lawsuit against the remnants of Wells & Associates. I walked away with nothing but the micro SD card and the knowledge that I had avenged Alistair and exposed the rot he died trying to contain. I now live a quiet life, far from Boston, far from the gilded cages. I use my restoration skills to work on public projects, restoring beauty that belongs to everyone. I am no longer obsessed with surfaces. I'm obsessed with truth. I still have that photo of the carved wooden bird. It sits on my small, unassuming desk. It reminds me that even the smallest, most fragile object can hold the key to the largest secrets. My new life is not spectacular or wealthy, but it is entirely, wonderfully my own. I finally shed the role of the grieving widow and became the person Alistair always knew I was. The one who would look closer. The one who would not allow the silence to win.